Say these words when your faith shakes. There comes a moment in life when the ground beneath your feet feels like it's crumbling, when every prayer you speak seems to vanish into silence, and when the faith that once carried you now feels like a fragile thread about to break. This is not weakness. This is the very human experience of being alive, of walking through storms that test not only your beliefs, but also the structure of your mind and the endurance of your heart. When your faith shakes, it is not only a spiritual tremor, it is also a neurological and emotional event inside you. Your body tightens, your breathing shortens, your heart races. The brain interprets uncertainty as a threat, flooding you with doubt and fear. You feel the chaos inside, and it echoes through every thought. But here is where the turning point begins. Words, spoken out loud, with intention and clarity, carry the ability to shift the chemistry of the brain and calm the body. They are not empty phrases. They are commands that reshape the way neurons fire and the way emotions are processed. When spoken in moments of despair, they act as anchors pulling you back from the spiral of panic. They give form to the invisible. They turn raw fear into focused courage. They transform noise into meaning. The truth is that doubt is not your enemy. Doubt is the signal that you are standing at the edge of growth. Faith that has never been shaken is faith that has never been tested. And it is in the trembling, in the raw vulnerability of uncertainty, that you are invited to speak with power. You do not fight fear with silence. You confront it with words that reshape your inner state. These words are more than sentences. They are decisions. They are the boundary between surrendering to despair and standing firm in hope. So today, in this video, we will walk through the precise words you must say when your faith shakes. And more importantly, we will explore why they work, psychologically, spiritually, and biologically. By the end, you will understand not only what to say, but how those words can become the ritual that restores your inner clarity every time life tries to steal it. The moment when faith trembles. It begins quietly, almost imperceptible, like a faint crack in a wall you once thought unbreakable. At first, it's only a question whispered in your mind. What if this doesn't work? What if I am alone? That is the exact instant when faith starts to tremble, not in grand explosions, but in small, corrosive doubts that creep into your thoughts. Recognizing this moment is essential, because it is here that you either allow the spiral to drag you deeper, or you intervene with awareness. Your body signals it before your mind admits it. You feel the weight in your chest, the shallow breath, the restless energy moving through your hands. These are not random sensations. They are your nervous system's alarm bells, warning you that uncertainty has been perceived as a threat. Andrew Huberman explains how the brain reacts to ambiguity by heightening alertness and stress hormones. In that heightened state, even the smallest doubt feels overwhelming. That's why faith shaking feels like the world itself is shaking. It's your entire body mirroring the storm within. In psychology, Judith Beck teaches that thoughts are not passive observations, but triggers. A single thought, if left unchallenged, grows into a narrative. That narrative then becomes your emotional reality. When your faith trembles, it isn't just about belief. It's about the story you are beginning to tell yourself. I can't handle this. I'm abandoned. Nothing will change. And unless interrupted, that story shapes everything you feel and do. But here lies the hidden truth. The trembling is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of being alive, of carrying something worth fighting for. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the soul becomes stronger not in calm but in resistance. Faith shaking is proof that you are in the middle of transformation, standing at the threshold of growth. Recognizing this moment with clarity instead of shame gives you back control. You don't have to drown in the tremor. You can name it, face it, and prepare to speak the words that anchor you again, the silence that screams within us. There are times when the room is quiet, no voices around, no distractions pulling your attention, yet inside your mind there is a deafening roar. It is the silence that does not comfort but unsettles, the silence where every fear grows louder, every unanswered question takes on the weight of truth, and every delay feels like abandonment. This is the silence that screams, not with sound but with the echo of your own uncertainty. In that silence, the brain does what it has been wired to do. It seeks patterns, explanations, meanings. When no external answer appears, the mind begins to invent its own, and often those inventions lean toward the negative. David M. Clarke, in his studies on anxiety, describes how the absence of clear signals from the outside world often leads the mind to exaggerate internal threats. In other words, when you cannot see the path, your thoughts create shadows that look larger than they really are. This inner noise often convinces you that you are alone in your struggle, yet solitude can be deceptive. The silence that seems empty is also the very space where the most powerful realignments can happen. Montaigne once reflected that when external noise fades, the soul is forced to hear its own voice. That voice may begin in despair, but it also carries the seed of resilience waiting to be uncovered. When faith shakes, silence is not your enemy. It is the amplifier of your current state. If you are lost in fear, silence will magnify it. But if you learn to direct your words with purpose into that silence, it transforms from a chamber of echoing doubts into a sanctuary of clarity. The key is understanding that you are never truly alone with your thoughts. You are always in dialogue with yourself, with your fears, and with the unseen strength that responds when you dare to speak into the void. The anatomy of doubt. Doubt does not arrive fully formed. It unfolds step by step, like a chain reaction in the mind and body. It often begins as a fleeting thought, a subtle what-if that passes almost unnoticed. But when that thought is repeated, it triggers a cascade. The amygdala, the part of the brain that processes fear, lights up, sending signals that prepare the body for threat. Heart rate rises, muscles tense, cortisol floods the system. What began as a thought has now become a physical state of alarm. Andrew Huberman explains that the brain is designed to prioritize survival over peace, which means uncertainty is treated as danger. When your faith shakes, you are not imagining the intensity of the experience. Your biology is amplifying it. This is why small doubts feel so overwhelming. The body reacts as if you are facing something life-threatening. It is not just belief that is shaking. It is your nervous system caught in overdrive. From the perspective of cognitive behavioral therapy, Judith Beck points out that doubts thrive when left unchallenged. The mind constructs distorted narratives, magnifying worst-case scenarios and minimizing past resilience. You stop remembering victories and start obsessing over failures. Doubt in this sense is not simply questioning. It is the construction of an entire false reality where fear appears stronger than truth. And yet, even within this anatomy, there is hope. Just as the body can be driven into alarm, it can be guided back into calm. Just as neurons fire to create fear, they can fire to restore clarity. Words spoken with intention disrupt the spiral, forcing the mind to redirect its focus. Philosophy reminds us that clarity is born from questioning. Descartes himself began with doubt, but instead of being consumed by it, he used it as the foundation for certainty. The anatomy of doubt, then, is not a trap, it is a map. If you understand how it works, you can navigate it and reach the other side with stronger, steadier faith. The invisible power of words. Every word you speak is more than sound. It is an impulse of energy that travels through your nervous system, shapes the chemistry of your brain, and redefines the emotions you feel in the present moment. This is why, in the moments when faith trembles, silence can be dangerous, but words can be liberating. Words are not passive, they are active interventions. They reprogram the inner storm. Neuroscience shows this clearly. When you say words of strength, your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for reasoning and regulation, activates and begins to calm the amygdala, the center of fear. It is as if your brain receives a command: shift from chaos to order. Andrew Huberman emphasizes that the act of speaking with focus is not symbolic, but physiological. It literally rewires how the brain perceives the moment. Cognitive therapy adds another layer. Judith Beck teaches that thoughts become beliefs when repeated, and beliefs govern behavior. Speaking words aloud interrupts negative loops, replacing them with new narratives. This is why repeating words of faith or strength is not empty ritual. It is behavioral science at work, creating a new story in your mind and anchoring it in your emotions. History echoes the same truth. Stoic philosophers repeated mantras not because they were poetic, but because they trained the mind to resist fear. Sacred texts preserved phrases for generations because they served as anchors in storms of doubt. The invisible power of words is that they connect the inner world of thoughts with the outer world of action, bridging the gap between despair and resilience. When faith shakes, your voice becomes the tool that steadies it. Not because the situation outside changes instantly, but because the landscape inside you transforms. Words shift physiology, thoughts, and spirit. What once felt impossible begins to feel bearable, and what felt unbearable begins to open toward hope, the voice that conquers fear. Fear has a way of disguising itself as truth. It whispers that you are too weak, that you are alone, that nothing will change. The danger is not only in what fear says, but in how convincingly it speaks. If left unanswered, fear becomes the dominant voice in your mind. The moment faith shakes, fear races to take control. But fear can be interrupted, not by silence, but by words spoken with conviction. Science explains why this works. When you speak phrases of courage, your brain's auditory system processes your own voice as external input. In other words, your nervous system responds as though someone else is reassuring you. Andrew Huberman describes this as a form of self-directed regulation. By speaking firmly, you shift your brain's focus from the imagined threat to the immediate safety of your own words. The body calms, the breath steadies, the heartbeat slows. Cognitive behavioral therapy teaches the same principle. Fear-based thoughts must be challenged. If the mind says, "I cannot handle this," the spoken response becomes, "I have overcome before, and I will again." If the thought insists, "I am alone," the spoken answer is, "I am supported, even when I do not see it yet." These words do not deny fear. They confront it and replace it with clarity. Throughout history, people facing overwhelming trials declared words to stand firm. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Sacred scriptures are filled with declarations spoken aloud in the darkest moments. The voice that conquers fear is not a mystical gift. It is the practice of speaking words that anchor you in truth when lies press hardest. When your faith trembles, fear will try to be louder than your hope. The question is not whether fear will speak, but whether you will answer back. And the strength of your voice, calm, steady, intentional, is what transforms fear from a master into a defeated echo. When the mind wants to give up. There is a point in every struggle when the mind whispers not just doubt but surrender. It tells you that the fight is pointless, that holding on is a waste of energy, that letting go of faith will at least relieve the tension. This is the moment when the greatest danger emerges, not because circumstances outside have grown worse, but because the inner dialogue has shifted toward resignation. The mind begins constructing reasons to quit, and if left unchecked, those reasons appear rational, almost logical. From a psychological perspective, this is the result of cognitive distortions, automatic thoughts that paint reality in extremes. Judith Beck explains how the brain, when overwhelmed, filters out hope and amplifies hopelessness. You stop remembering victories and instead collect evidence for failure. You stop anticipating solutions and instead rehearse scenarios of defeat. The mind does not simply want relief, it demands escape. Neuroscience shows why this feels so heavy. Under prolonged stress, cortisol depletes motivation and energy, creating a sense of exhaustion that convinces you giving up is the only option. Andrew Huberman highlights that the brain confuses energy depletion with impossibility. When resources run low, the mind interprets the challenge as unachievable. In truth, it is not impossibility. It is fatigue disguised as finality. Philosophy has long addressed this turning point. Seneca wrote that true strength is revealed when the temptation to surrender is at its peak. Faith is not tested in moments of clarity, but in moments of chaos, when the mind begs for escape. Recognizing this mental pattern allows you to pause and remember. Wanting to give up is not the same as needing to give up. When your faith trembles and your mind whispers surrender, that is the precise moment to intervene with words. Speaking resilience disrupts the loop of hopelessness. Declaring that you are not finished, that you will not retreat, rewrites the story your mind is trying to seal. And in doing so, you discover that the urge to quit is not the end. It is the doorway to a deeper level of strength waiting to rise. The words that reignite hope. Hope is not a passive feeling that suddenly appears. It is something you cultivate, breathe into, and call back when it tries to slip away. When faith shakes, hope feels distant, like a fading light on the horizon. But words, spoken with intention, act like sparks in the darkness. They are the small flames that can grow into a fire strong enough to push back despair. Psychology confirms that emotions are not fixed states. They respond to cues. Judith Beck emphasizes that repeating phrases of possibility, "This is temporary. I have endured before. I am moving forward one step at a time," reshapes the mind's filter. Suddenly, the brain begins to search for evidence of hope instead of rehearsing evidence of failure. By speaking hope, you prime your attention to notice opportunities and support that were invisible in despair. Neuroscience explains this shift as well. Andrew Huberman describes how words and images tied to future possibility trigger dopamine release, the chemical that fuels motivation and persistence. When you declare words of hope, your brain literally changes its chemistry, pulling you from paralysis into movement. You may not see the solution yet, but your body and mind realign to keep searching for it. Philosophy echoes the same truth. Aristotle believed that hope is tied to action. It is not wishful thinking, but the expectation of good, built through deliberate choices. The Stoics viewed hope not as naive optimism, but as courage in advance, a mindset that prepares you to face difficulty with resilience. The words that reignite hope are not elaborate. They are simple, repeated, and deeply human. I am not done. This pain has a purpose. The story is not finished. Each declaration pushes back the shadows and opens a window for light to return. And once spoken, hope is no longer just an idea. It becomes a force that moves through your thoughts, your emotions, and your spirit, turning trembling faith into steady endurance. The echo of ancient traditions. Across centuries, humanity has faced the same tremors of fear and doubt that you feel today. And in every age, words have been the anchor. The Stoics whispered reminders to themselves before dawn. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his journal, not for others to read, but to strengthen his own resolve against despair. Seneca crafted letters that spoke more like mantras than arguments, repeating truths until they became armor for the mind. These ancient practices were not rituals of vanity. They were survival strategies, tools to stabilize the soul when life felt unbearable. Sacred texts across cultures carry the same pattern. The Psalms are filled with declarations spoken aloud in moments of anguish, lines repeated not because God needed to hear them, but because the speaker needed to reshape his own heart. In Eastern traditions, chants and mantras were never mere sounds. They were instruments designed to focus the mind, regulate breathing, and center awareness. The ancients knew what modern neuroscience now proves. Words, repeated with intention, alter physiology, and carve pathways in the brain that strengthen resilience. Philosophy, too, recognized this power. Aristotle taught that virtue is formed by habit, and habit is cemented by repetition. To speak words of courage was to practice courage itself, until it became natural. Montaigne observed centuries later that the inner dialogue we sustain is the very soil where either despair or resilience grows. Even Descartes, whose method began with radical doubt, discovered certainty through deliberate reasoning, a structured repetition of thought until clarity emerged. The echo of ancient traditions teaches us this. You are not the first to tremble, and you will not be the last. What carried generations before us was not silence but speech, the deliberate choice to declare words of strength against the weight of uncertainty. And when you speak into your own silence today, you are joining that lineage, standing in the same stream of human resilience that has flowed through history, the science of repetition. Repetition is not redundancy, it is reinforcement. Each time you speak the same words of strength, you are not merely echoing yourself. You are training your brain, your body, and your spirit to believe them more deeply. Neuroscience explains this with precision. Every repeated phrase strengthens the neural pathways associated with it, making those thoughts easier to access the next time doubt arises. It is the same principle by which habits form. What you rehearse becomes what you live. Andrew Huberman describes how consistent repetition activates the brain's plasticity, the ability to rewire itself. When you declare words of resilience daily, even before the crisis hits, you are preparing your nervous system to respond with calm instead of chaos. This is why athletes visualize their victories and why meditators repeat mantras. The brain cannot distinguish between rehearsal and reality. It adapts to what it hears most often. In cognitive behavioral therapy, repetition is the cornerstone of change. Judith Beck teaches that it is not enough to think a positive thought once. It must be practiced until it becomes the automatic response to challenge. The first time you say, "I can face this," it may feel forced. But the 10th time, the 100th time, the words start to feel natural, and eventually they arise on their own in the very moment fear appears. Philosophy aligns with this truth. Aristotle wrote that excellence is not an act but a habit. The Stoics trained daily, not for admiration, but to build reflexes of courage and clarity when adversity arrived. What they called discipline, we now call neuroplasticity, but the principle remains unchanged. The science of repetition assures you that you are not helpless against the tremors of doubt. By speaking the right words consistently, you are building a reflex, a shield, a new default state. Each repetition is a brick laid in the foundation of unshakable faith, and over time, what once felt fragile becomes unbreakable, not by chance, but by design. Turning words into refuge. There is a difference between words spoken in desperation and words built into the rhythm of your life. When faith shakes, random declarations may help for a moment, but what truly transforms you is turning those words into a daily refuge, a sanctuary you carry everywhere. A refuge is not about escaping reality. It is about creating stability within it. The words you choose become the walls that shield you when storms rise. Neuroscience shows how rituals anchor the nervous system. When you tie specific words to specific actions, such as breathing deeply as you speak them each morning, you create a predictable signal of safety for your brain. Andrew Huberman explains that these repeated pairings calm the autonomic nervous system, lowering stress hormones and reinforcing focus. Your body begins to associate those words with peace, no matter the chaos around you. Psychology emphasizes the same practice. Judith Beck notes that when affirmations or declarations are integrated into daily routines, they shift from conscious effort into automatic response. Over time, speaking words of resilience in the morning becomes as natural as brushing your teeth and just as essential. These rituals build a foundation that makes you less vulnerable when doubt strikes unexpectedly. Ancient wisdom echoes this principle. The Psalms were recited morning and night, not because repetition was required for divine attention, but because the human heart needed constant reminders. The Stoics began their day with affirmations to prepare for hardship and ended it with reflection to strengthen clarity. Refuge was never found outside of them. It was cultivated within. Turning words into refuge means choosing to no longer wait for faith to tremble before you speak. It means creating a rhythm of declaration that keeps you anchored even before the storm hits. With practice, your words become more than sounds. They become the steady ground beneath your feet, the place your mind instinctively runs to when everything else feels unstable. The trial by fire of faith. There comes a moment when everything you have learned, rehearsed, and declared is put to the test. It is not theoretical anymore. It is the night when sleep refuses to come, the morning when bad news arrives, the day when every support you relied on seems to vanish. This is the trial by fire, the crucible where faith either collapses or solidifies. And in that furnace, words become more than comfort. They become survival. In psychology, this moment is described as the breaking point, when the mind believes it has no more strength left. Judith Beck shows that these points of collapse are not the end, but thresholds. The automatic thought says, "I cannot go further." The intervention is to speak against it. "I will take one more step." That spoken choice, however small, breaks the illusion of finality and proves to the brain that persistence is still possible. Neuroscience explains why this works. Under acute stress, the brain narrows its focus, exaggerating the threat and ignoring options. Andrew Huberman highlights that directing attention deliberately through words broadens perception again. When you declare, "I am not defeated, I am still standing," your brain reorients, pulling you out of tunnel vision and revealing possibilities you couldn't see before. History is filled with such trials. The Stoics endured exile, imprisonment, and loss. Yet their journals and writings reveal a pattern. They met fire with declaration. Spiritual traditions tell the same story. Prophets, saints, and sages all spoke words into their darkest nights. Not because the fire vanished, but because within it they discovered that words could carry them through flames without being consumed. The trial by fire of faith is not about avoiding heat. It is about discovering that the heat cannot destroy what is anchored in truth. And the words you choose to speak in those moments are not only for survival, they are the proof that even when everything shakes, your spirit can still declare strength, and that declaration changes everything. The final declaration that changes everything. At the end of every struggle, after the silence has been faced, the doubts have been dissected, and the fire has been endured, there comes a moment of decision. Not a decision about circumstances, those may still be unresolved, but a decision about who you will be in the midst of them. This is where the final declaration rises, not as a whisper of survival, but as a proclamation of identity. You do not say these words to change the world outside first. You say them to transform the world inside. Science confirms the power of such declarations. The nervous system calibrates around what it hears most often, and a strong, repeated statement becomes the default signal your brain believes. By declaring words of resilience, you stabilize your body, lower your stress responses, and ignite dopamine-driven motivation to persist. Psychology agrees. Beliefs are shaped by repeated thoughts, and when those thoughts are spoken with conviction, they cement into truths that direct action. Philosophy has always understood this. Descartes declared, "I think, therefore I am," not as idle speculation, but as a grounding truth that anchored reason itself. The Stoics declared that no external force could take away the freedom of their inner world. Sacred traditions echo the same pattern. Final declarations spoken not at the end of strength, but at the beginning of transformation. So when your faith shakes, the final declaration is this: I will not surrender my voice to fear. I will speak life. I will speak hope. I will speak strength, until my heart aligns again with truth. These are not words of denial. They are words of creation. They do not erase the storm, but they steady the ship. They do not remove the fire, but they ensure you pass through it unburned. The final declaration changes everything because it changes you. And when you change, the storm loses its power. What once threatened to break you becomes the very force that proves your resilience. Speak these words when your faith shakes, and you will discover that the trembling was never the end. It was the beginning of unshakable clarity.